Chapter 1451. Zist of the Corrupted Heart. The dungeon hearts of the Fifth have been known to the Legion for centuries. They are one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Crath and, it is theorized, the source of the corruption that plagues the stratum. For the hearts sit at the core of the Fifth. All the tunnels, passages, shafts and spaces originate from them, and return to them. The mana flows through the entire stratum in an endless cycle, with these massive, beating organs providing the impetus. Every drop of mana in the Fifth passes through these organs, and therefore would make the perfect place to taint the entire layer. With this knowledge, the Legion has attempted on several occasions to seize a heart, to study and understand it, perhaps even heal whatever ails it, but to no avail. There is no place in the Fifth that is more defended, more difficult to assault, or more dangerous to draw near. The mana is thicker closer to the hearts, making survival that much harder, but more than that, the Crath tribes obsess over the hearts. Every passage is watched, every tiny sliver of tunnel guarded. Drawing close to a heart will pull an unprecedented horde of slugs, coldly furious and eager to harm. Every attempt to seize one of these key locations has failed at a significant cost. The Legion has decided, for the time being, it is not worth the effort to try again. Excerpt from Records of the Legionum Abbaci Campaigns in the Deep. Suspended from the roof of the heart lay the slime ground of the Zist tribe, and it was immense. A sprawling web of mucus nets that had been built upon using rock and silk, it was unlike anything the Crathlath of the Slee had ever seen before. Not only in its unusual construction, but its sheer size. He had heard of the cities, of the weaker races living on the Fourth, but had never seen one himself. This, he imagined, was what one must be like. Layer after layer of structures, stretching from one side of the heart to the other. He didn't know how it could be possible, but somehow they had managed to dampen the movement of the walls so the entire city didn't shake apart with every beat of the heart. The whole thing was incredible to behold, and intimidating. For the first time, he felt as if he had seen the true extent of the power of his own race. The Crath tribes were far greater, far mightier than he had ever assumed. It was exhilarating. His ambition soared, burning in his flesh just as hot as the acid he cultivated there. A tribe could be this strong, this mighty, this numerous. If so, then he would have to have it for himself. These were bold thoughts to be thinking while being carried to the Crathlath bound in spider web, unable to move, but Zaluth felt no need to fool himself. He wanted to be great, and no matter the obstacles, he would overcome them. Right in the heart of the city, a solid ball of hardened slime and mucus formed the dwelling of the tribe leader. Unceremoniously, Zaluth was brought within, and before he truly got his bearings, dumped on the floor. "What have you brought for me today, Zaluth?" a cold voice demanded. "A messenger who's come a long way to see you, Crathlath," Zaluth's captor replied as his pet spider backed up. Zaluth rolled over with some difficulty, then saw the largest slug he had ever laid eyes on resting upon a dais. Clearly old, from the color of him, the leader of the Zist was enormous, with a thick cloud of acrid air hanging around him. His acid must be so strong it beggared belief. How was his flesh able to withstand it? A messenger. From which tribe? From the Bulg, though, as you can see, this one is not a Bulg. The enormous slug frowned, then hawked and spat a wad of such potent mucus it had eaten itself away before it had even hit the floor. "Speak plainly, Zaluth," the Crathlath demanded. "I can't be bothered with petty details." "I could explain it myself." Zaluth dared to speak up, though when the glare of the massive Crath fell on him, he felt he may have made a mistake. "You have not been told to speak," the Crathlath rumbled, flesh starting to boil and sizzle as his rage ignited. "You may wish to let him speak for himself," Zaluth suggested. "He claims to have come bearing a message from the Ancient." It was difficult not to wilt under the glare of such a powerful slug, but Zaluth held his nerve, barely, until the Crathlath slowly relaxed. "The Ancient, Theorazin has awoken, then. Good." Gradually, the sizzling of his flesh subsided, and he turned his gaze back to Zaluth. "Speak." Zaluth took a breath. Briefly, he considered asking to be untied, but he felt that might be asking for too much. "Theorazin has spoken to a number of Crath in dreams and visions," he explained, "myself included. He has tasked us with killing 2 monsters and halting the singing. I left the upper reaches of the stratum where we have been fighting off an invasion to deliver this message to the Bulg. When they couldn't find a willing scout to come here, I volunteered. Ob Epsilon S. He got the entire message out in a rush, worried he might be cut off, but once he had fallen silent, there was no reply. The Crathlath simply watched him, eyes slowly bobbing from side to side as he thought to himself. Eventually, He opened his mouth to reveal the blackened, deadly fangs within. The Ancient has tasks for us, and an invasion despoils our home. It seems much has been happening above without the Zist being told. Zalus. Kraflath. Remind me to speak with Ulis. It seems I must remind him of his level. Zalus grinned evilly. I will. And what of this one? Zaluth held his breath as the giant slug contemplated. This one will live, for now, he said finally. Show our guest somewhere and gather my inner circle, there is a lot to do. On your way out, find Tizith and tell her to prepare to open the vents. You want to open them again? Zalus said, surprised. So soon? There are invaders in our lands, the Kraflath replied as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. They must be repelled. Chapter 1452, Working Dangerously. As it turned out, it was possible to work with a native, undamaged core from the 5th. It was just a massive pain in the backside for all involved. Led by the fearless Formo, Bella and Ellie worked hard with the battalions fighting on the platform to secure what they needed. Namely, a monster core that had never touched the cleansed mana. As it turned out, they were already feeding biomass from defeated monsters into the intakes on the platforms, allowing the food to be sucked away along with the mana and fed to the woofers. This practice had led to an unexpected consequence of certain channels getting clogged with food. That didn't stop the mana from flowing, but it did threaten to break the enchantments and necessitated a fix. It stood to reason that the battalions could feed a core into the channels as well. They had mechanisms and specially crafted tools to reach out and grab things beyond the safe zone, so why not? It would be difficult, and dangerous, since they were doing it in the middle of an ongoing battle, but it was possible. Then they needed to speak to Cobalt and Tungstand about creating some sort of catch mechanism to get a hold of the cores before they were whipped away to the woofers. This was another pain in the carapace, but the two carvers were eventually able to figure out something they thought would work. Once it was in place, all the core shapers needed then was a place they could work on the cores. After all, the cores could never touch cleansed mana, which meant they needed a workspace with tightly contained native energy. Once that was done, they could work on the cores, and then somehow raise the monsters in a containment zone. Then and only then, would their new pets be ready to fight outside the fortress. An awful lot of work, I say. Formo exclaimed, but perhaps it will prove worth it. We can't say either way just yet. It's just a shame that none of it is being done by us, Bella said regretfully, watching the carvers work at building the spaces that they needed. No need to worry, we will have a smashing amount of work to deal with soon enough. Have no fears about that. And he wasn't wrong. With the catchment facilities in place, it didn't take long until the first cores trickled into the waiting bay. Once the workshop was done, an intricately controlled space containing pockets of 5th stratum mana, the cores were dropped into the separate workstations, ready to be manipulated. Since it was necessary to touch a core to obtain the best results, they required specially produced, heavily enchanted gear that would allow them to carefully extend an appendage into the foulness in order to work on the cores. For the ants, that naturally meant antennae coverings, but for Formo, a special glove was made. With so many steps completed, all that remained was to get to work on the cores themselves and try to come up with a viable design. Formo, as the most experienced by far, was the first to make an attempt. With confidence, the Sophist used the sealed glove to extend a single claw into the contaminated space, tapping it on the core, and then growing still. Bella and Ellie watched with bated breath as he worked his powerful mind on the core, only to jump in the air when he burst out with a loud exclamation. Absolutely filthy, I say. He roared across their mental link. PHAW in balderdash. He withdrew his hand and shook it as if some vile substance clung to his skin, although his body had never come into direct contact with the contamination. What's wrong? Bella asked, worried. Was the containment breached? No, the Sophist replied sourly, it's the core itself. Tainted and corrupted right to the heart of it. I could feel it trying to reach into my mind while I was working on it. Insidious and foul thing. Does that mean it's impossible to create a 5th stratum pet? Bella asked, despondent. If even the cores were so tainted as to try and corrupt the mind of someone working on it, what would happen if a core shaper actually reconstituted the monster? A permanent mental link would be created between them, possibly another avenue for the 5th to attack. Would a loyal 5th stratum pet infect its master without even trying to? I don't give up that easy. Formo declared. The first thing we need to do is find the elements of the core related to this blighted corruption and manipulate them in a way that makes them safer to handle. It'll be bloody difficult, but it's a necessary step. The two of you can work on the problem as well, just make sure you aren't in contact with it for too long. Bah, he exclaimed, shaking his hands. Disgusting thing to do to monsters. So the three of them got to work. One by one, they identified the hurdles and made progress towards solutions. The cores of the fifth stratum monsters were unlike anything Bella and Ellie had ever seen before. The cleansed cores they'd worked with had wiped out vast sections of information contained inside, and now those sections were filled with malevolent corruption. Navigating that toxicity while making just the right tweaks was a mind-bending, dangerous task that they doubted they could trust to any but the finest core shapers in the colony. After days of effort, the first viable core was ready to be turned into a pet. Exhausted, Formo, Bella and Ellie passed it to the next stage of the process, the pet-raising area, and collapsed in a heap. Silently and without fanfare, the shadows rose to swallow them. Chapter 1453, Vented. Solent was deep in reflective meditation when she perceived a messenger was fast approaching. Not for the first time, she considered implementing a network of mind mages for near-instantaneous delivery of messages, but again had to shelve the idea. Even though the colony could provide the number of mages to create such a network through the fortress, their expertise was far better spent on battlefields, where their spells were capable of inflicting tremendous damage from a relatively safe distance. Being a leader meant mastering the art of the possible. A good idiom. Solent nodded to herself with satisfaction, resolving to add it to her annals of wisdom. One day, she would be satisfied that the collective words would contain enough knowledge to be of worth to other generals, then and only then was she prepared to share them. For now, they remained a collection of her personal thoughts and idioms. Drawing her antennae through the elbow joints of her front legs, cleaning them and simultaneously using the action as a mental trigger to cast away extraneous thoughts, she made herself ready to receive news. When the scout was finally admitted to her chamber, Solent felt as if her mind had been cleansed, all baggage and weight thrown out and leaving behind a placid lake. "What news do you bring?" she asked the clearly tired messenger. "The vents have opened again," the scout reported. "I was told to inform you as soon as possible." Solent leaned back in her seat, pressing her forelegs to the sides of her head. Yes, this had always been a possibility, and she had planned accordingly. Was this timing coincidental, or did it signify something greater? She pondered on the issue for several minutes before she lowered her legs again. "Take me to Cobalt and Tungstant," she said. They were the ones who sent for you." "I know." Despite this occurrence, Solent was still at peace. Still calm. No ripples marred the surface of her lake. The fifth had proven to be a worthy challenge for her, but so far, everything had been within her expectations. She was confident. She didn't lose. Cobalt and Tungstant were arguing, not an unusual occurrence lately. It seemed that, as the two ants developed their skills and grew more experienced in design, engineering and construction, differences in opinion cropped up more and more. To Solent, this was a strength, as it provided the chance to test their ideas against another and defend them in rigorous debate, ensuring they were sound. But she sensed the two siblings were less comfortable with these arguments, too used to agreeing with each other to get any benefit from their dialogue. "Sisters," Solent greeted them as she arrived, nodding respectfully to the scout who had acted as her guide. "I've been told the vents are open again. Why have you sent for me?" "Because it's an emergency," Cobalt said, irritated. "There are 17 vent sites within the fortress, and each of them is spilling extremely concentrated doom at a high rate." "We have completed our countermeasures, have we not?" Solent asked. "Just because we built systems that haven't ever been tested before, doesn't mean we solved the problem." Cobalt burst out. "Now that they're being used, we have to check every single inch of them to make sure there aren't any leaks or mistakes." "Of course," Solent said soothingly. "I would expect nothing less." She turned to the vent site nearby, which the two sisters had likely been arguing over. The vents were interesting. The ants had, obviously, investigated them extensively after the first incident. As it turned out, excavating them was possible, but difficult. Each vent was connected to a fleshy tube that ran through the rock and connected to something far, far below. If they wanted to, the colony could have ripped them all out and been done with it, but Solent had other ideas. So, an emergency plan had to be put in place. Right now, the vent was capped with an elaborate device created by the finest enchanters the colony had produced. It acted much the way the walls of Zaluth's prison did, or indeed the intakes of the platforms, drawing the mana in without letting it come into contact with the surface. Everything the mana of the fifth touched was corrupted, after all, and nothing it came into contact with could ever contain it. This cap then fed the energy into a network of pipes that eventually connected to the mana channels that fed the woofer collectives. "And what seems to be the issue?" Solent asked. You were arguing when I arrived. I assume there is a matter that needs to be resolved. What? Oh, no, that's fine. Fine, is it? Tungsten spoke up for the first time, fixing her sibling with a hard stare. It didn't seem fine a moment ago. We don't need to bother Solent with it, Cobalt insisted. It's an issue for the two of us to sort out. Personally, I don't mind getting another person's opinion. It can give an outside perspective that may prove useful. There's no need. Solent clacked her mandibles softly, drawing their attention back to her. I presume this matter has something to do with the construction of the caps. Or the distribution of extra woofers. What? No, Tungsten shook her head. We've been arguing over the proper ratio of sugar in tea, and what measure we should use for it. Cobalt thinks we should continue to use the human spoons measurement, but I argue we should move to a new metric, since we don't use spoons. What are your thoughts? Solent eyed the two of them. I am returning to my meditation, she said, then turned and left. Chapter 1454. Worrying Signs. Of course, the knowledge that massive quantities of tainted mana are being pumped into the fortress is causing me a little stress. Why wouldn't it? Hopefully the colony has it under control. I could help. Or could I? I mean, what would I even do if I were to go in there? Nothing, that's what. I'm worried. You're worried, Jern said from beside me. Gah, when the heck did you get there? I've been here for 10 minutes. Probably didn't notice him because I've been too worried. Wait a sec, how the heck did you know I was worried? I demand. The young man shrugs and scratches the back of his head. Not sure. I keep getting a feeling about what you're feeling. You can't read my thoughts, can you? Jern is a dummy, Jern is a dummy. Jern is a dummy, Jern is a dummy. No, nothing like that. I think it's more of an emotions thing. So you know I'm worried. I do, he nods his head. One sec. HOOOOOOWWWWWLLLLLLLLL. Another bomb launched into the void. It'll chew up the monsters I aimed it at, but then it'll suck up a heap of mucus and run out of power. I have to wonder, just where is all this lousy mucus going? Monsters aren't the only thing springing from the walls in the fifth during the wave, oh no. Every wall, every surface is also producing a viscous mucus at a steady rate. Not much per square meter, but it adds up quick. Since the fortress was disconnected from the tunnels around us, the stuff flowing towards the platforms is just dropping down into the void and piling up at the bottom of the cavity we built. Presumably, there are tunnels down there receiving absolutely catastrophic amounts of slime and filling up from top to bottom. Then where the heck does it go? Presumably, it flows down into lower tunnels, then down further, and then it drops into the sixth, right? Like, the volume of mucus being produced, from the entire fifth, would have to add up to millions and millions of tons per day. If all of that eventually dropped into the sixth, it would have to corrupt it as well, surely. Except we know that isn't the case. I've seen sixth stratum monsters with my own eyes. Which brings me back to my question, where the heck is all the mucus going? Now you're annoyed about something, Jern nods. Gah, if you're worried, or annoyed, you could just ask us to look into whatever it is you have on your mind. I can go right now if you want. Go, and do what? Look into whatever is bothering you. I'm not doing much around here right now. He is, in fact, on a break from fighting. Of all the Templars, he seems to be the one best suited to combat. When he whips that axe around, he does some serious work, and the light coming off that blade is getting more dense seemingly by the day. I wonder, now you're curious about something, he says. Damn it, fine, what rank are your axe skills? His eyes blank out for a second. Rank 5, nearly rank 6. That's fast. Holy moly, where the heck does all the mucus go after it all falls down? No idea, but I'll ask someone. Anything else? How is the fortress coping with the influx of mana from the vents? I'll find out. Be back soon. And he trots off, axe resting on his shoulder. Huh, I guess. I'm not used to having someone be so helpful. I mean, I could use the vestibule to spy on all the most relevant ants to find out what's going on inside the walls, but I get a pretty incomplete picture when I do that. Like, what's Tungsten up to right now? Takes a while to find an individual, there. She's really wishing the pipe in front of her was connected using the cross method. What the heck does that mean? Now she's thinking about flow rates. Unhelpful. I could hassle a few ants who appear in the nave, but then I'd feel bad for distracting them from their work. I mean, if there is a crisis inside the fortress, the last thing they need is me annoying them when there's nothing I could do to help anyway. I never thought of just having someone go and ask for me. It's a good idea, I guess. I'll have to thank Jern when he gets back. Well, enough worrying about that, it isn't like I don't have work to do. Briefly, I check in on the sub-brains and see that they are indeed working very hard. Good work, team. Out of sheer boredom, I've been diversifying my spell selection away from just Dragon's Breath all the time and seeing what else works. Throwing gobs of lava around has been fun, I can't deny it, but it isn't super effective. The 5th is just so contagious that even lava starts to bubble and go yellow, degenerating into super hot slime in a matter of seconds. My solution to that problem: more lava. Which worked better. At least the stuff was able to reach its target before going bad. Ice was pretty much useless, water was worse than useless, almost instantly turning into mucus. Earth and stone just don't work that well against the monsters here. They're coated in thick layers of slime or are so spongy that blunt impacts just aren't effective. Stone spears are decent but not as effective as lobbing blobs of lava. I have to say, all the experimentation and variation has certainly been pushing my levels in the omni-elemental magic further than mindless flame throwing. At the rate I'm going, it won't be that long until I get another rank, and I expect some juicy new spells to come out of that. To be honest, fighting here has been a huge boon to my level gain in a lot of ways. The monsters of the 5th might be awful, but they appear to be fairly juicy sacks of XP. I guess that helps compensate for the complete lack of biomass they provide. So unsatisfying. Not that I want to eat them. Idly blasting away, my senses spike for an instant, sending my mind spinning as they hunt down the source. Turns out it isn't that hard to find. A giant glob of mucus has been launched towards the platform, so dense with energy that it's ringing like an alarm to my mana sense. What the heck? Where did that come from? Someone had to have been masking it while they were casting to produce something like that. That's no fair. I do that. Before it can reach us, I ditch all of my spells, even letting the omni-elemental construct go in order to use everything on one magic. I draw out my personal supply of gravitational magic and pour it into a single bomb. The sludge bomb is arcing through the air towards us, growing larger in my sight by the second. I am not a fan of this. Desperate, I throw out the gravity bomb as soon as I judge it's ready and empower it with the altar. HOOOOOOWWWWLLLLLLL. Not as large as I would have liked it to be, the bomb flies outward like a shrieking banshee, sucking in air like the eye of a hurricane. Luckily, my aim is on point and the two bombs collide. The gravity ball is immediately swallowed by the larger blob of hyper-dense mucus, only to expand inside it. I can sense the two energies colliding more clearly than I can see it, two condensed balls trying to consume each other. The mucus wins, but has been hollowed out and thrown off course. What remains falls into the void before the platform, dropping down into the abyss. Phew. Now, I'm fairly sure Jern can sense that I'm really worried. What the heck was that? Chapter 1455, Endless Song. The sublime joy of tea and biscuits was one thing. In fact, Ghazi had only grown in his appreciation for the things that so many Krath ignored completely. The ants had continued to work on making his cell more comfortable, despite his contemptuous insistence it wasn't necessary. As a result, he now had a leaf-shaped hammock, as he was told it was called, that snugly fit his form and wrapped over to enclose him while he slept. Ghazi had never felt so warm and safe, trapped in his own little soft cocoon, as he had while resting in that bed. Even the rug. The ants had taken his complaints about the surfaces within the cell being uncomfortable for his foot and gone on to make many, many iterations of carpet. It had been infuriating for him to wake up to another day just to find a new rug on the floor and a team of ants eagerly looking through the viewing window, hoping for feedback. At first, he'd lied to them, hoping they'd stop asking him, but found that lying to them only resulted in less comfortable rugs. And they wouldn't go away until he tested them, so he was ultimately only punishing himself. Now the ants had invented a strange surface covered in soft, springy prongs, each of them very small, and when he slid over it, he felt as if the large muscle on the underside of his body was receiving a soothing massage. Incredible. He had to hand it to the ants, they really knew how to make a Krath comfortable in their retirement. He may be isolated in a cell, but to Ghazi, this might as well have been paradise. He was fed better than he had ever been in his life, housed more comfortably than he could have imagined, and even had surprisingly engaging things to occupy his mind, like playing mind games with the invisible masterminds behind the invasion. He still hadn't discovered their identity and had been unsuccessful at teasing out much about them. He'd learned that the Ants had done a significant amount of trading with the Brathians, but decided that the conglomerates wouldn't have anything to do with an invasion of the fifth. There was no profit in it. Not that he was especially knowledgeable about the Brathians, but their greed was so legendary, even the Krath knew about it. No, someone else was driving this invasion, and he was determined to find out who. Except, he was out of time. Under the observation of several mages, Ghazi sipped his tea and gurgled with satisfaction as the hot liquid scalded his tongue in just the right way. If only there was a way to make it more acidic. Although he appeared completely domesticated, Ghazi was anything but. His eyes, though they appeared languid and relaxed, studied every corner of the room in relentless sweeps, looking for even the slightest hint of weakness. As always, his mana sense was finely tuned, waiting for a moment when he might escape. And of course, he needed something to focus on at all times, something to occupy his thoughts in order to keep that harrowing noise at bay. The singing, he couldn't hear it, he knew that, his cell was soundproof, but it didn't seem to matter. He could feel it, somehow, the singing seemed to penetrate directly into his mind. And it never stopped, a saccharine sweet song that curdled his guts and set his acid to boiling. Every note engorged his eyes and caused him to grind his fangs. What was it? Who was responsible? He hadn't been this filled with mindless rage since he was a young slug. There was something very, very wrong with this song, something that offended his Krath sensibilities at their very core. No wonder Therazin wanted it to end. Drawing in a deep breath, he tried to push it out of his mind and focus on the delicious scone in front of him. The cream and jam had been done just the right way, and the native mana of the fifth around him had corrupted them perfectly. Not much, just enough to curdle and foul the flavor so it more suited his palate. Delectable. His eyes flew open. To his mana sense, a huge mass of power had just descended from nowhere and slammed into the side of the fortress, not that far away. At least, he assumed it had struck the side of the fortress, it was stuck to something, after all. As he widened his senses to scan more carefully, something else caught his attention, a buildup of mana inside the fortress. He could always sense it, the neatly organized channels the ants had created to move the captured energy around, yet this was different, there was too much mana. Growing perfectly still, he closed his eyes again and sensed. Yes, there were problems at the outer wall, the blob was melting through. Inside the fortress, the danger point he'd identified was building and building, something was wrong. A clog in the system, a broken channel, whatever it was, a bottleneck had been created. If it wasn't fixed soon. There was no tremor or shaking when the channel ruptured, yet Ghazi still shivered. Raw, untamed energy of the fifth was pouring into the fortress nearby, filling up the tunnels and corridors. The ants watching him could sense it, he knew they could. They were nervous, cleaning their antennae and thwopping each other for comfort. They sealed the observation room. Yes, they would be safe there, since it was isolated from outside mana. Ghazi stretched, feeling the life returning to his old flesh. Carefully, he bent down and rolled up the carpet, tucking it under several of his arms, then nodded gratefully to the mages. They really did good work, these ants. It was a shame he couldn't stay, but Therazin had spoken. The singing must stop. The back wall of his cell began to hiss and sizzle as the mucus continued to eat its way through the hole, corrupting everything it touched. It was a shame he'd never be able to collect on his bet with Solent. 1456. So how is the fortress handling the mana from the vents? Badly, Jern, badly. Tungsten roared as she continued to turn a valve with her mandibles. Oh, I'll help, the human male said, stepping forward to grab it with his hands and twist. Although designed for ants, he did a good job of it. Clearly, he was getting quite strong doing whatever it was humans did to get stronger. I need 5 more of these turned, Tungsten snapped, making a quick decision. Go down that way and shut off the first 2 you find, I'll go this way. Trusting him to get it done, she raced off down the access shaft and latched onto the first valve. She turned it desperately, wondering if they should have been oiled more often as she did so. The muscles in her head responsible for closing her mandibles strained hard as she gripped and turned as hard as she could. When it was done, she sprinted to the next, clamping her jaws around it and turning, desperately. The moment it slid shut, she could feel the change come over the channels above. Now that the damaged section was cut off, it would stop spewing corruption into the corridors. They'd been lucky so few ants had been in the area when it blew, otherwise it could have been disastrous. She raced back to the access hatch, only to find Jern climbing up ahead of her. Sorry, he replied, his pheromone speech soft and polite. I'll be out of the way in a second. Despite not being an ant, he managed to scramble up the vertical wall quite well. Just what was the eldest teaching these humans? Were they part ant now or something? By the time she reached the top, there was already a small crowd of carvers gathered, waiting for instructions and offering solutions. No, Tungstand declared, shaking her head at one suggestion, we can't go in there. We can just wait for the cleansed mana to eat up the corruption and then repair the damage. I need 2 teams to go activate the channels into the reserve tanks. Go, go, go. Fast. 10 ants raced off to do the work while the rest peered into the sealed-off section of the tunnel nervously. It's fine, Tungstand snapped. Without more energy leaking from the channels, the leak won't be able to overcome the surrounding cleansed mana. I need a team to go and find the core shapers. I don't care what they're doing, we need them to come and increase the capacity of the woofer stations, now. Quote, isn't the excess being diverted into storage? One carver asked. And that storage has a capacity. What do you think is going to happen to this fortress if it actually fills up? Another team ran off while Tungstand tried to collect her racing thoughts. Cobalt had rushed off to shut down the channels on the other side of the leak, hopefully that was done, but there could be further problems elsewhere in the channel network. If another bottleneck were to occur, they'd need to shut that off too, which would shunt more power to other, already strained channels. Did they need to turn off the intake from the platforms? Solent had said they could, but only as a last resort. That energy was needed, desperately. The eldest was just worried about the vents and I said I'd come and ask how they were going, Jern said. I suppose, bursting isn't all that good. I'll let them know. Tungstand was jerked out of her thoughts and turned to look at the human. What? No, no, stick around, I might have a use for you. The human tilted his head to the side for a second, as if listening to something, then shook his head. Sorry, the eldest is really worrying about something right now. I should go and check. The eldest is worried. About what? Was the eldest able to sense the burst channels? I suppose I can ask. Give me a second. Jern closed his eyes for a moment. Apparently, someone launched a huge mucus bomb at the platform. The eldest deflected it, but thinks it might have hit the fortress wall. Oh heck, Tungstand exclaimed, thoughts immediately racing. She did not need this right now. A huge wad of condensed fifth mana. It could be enough to break through the exterior, and if that happened. You can communicate with the eldest. She demanded. Jern nodded, then shrugged. I can get him to talk to me. Do it now, tell the eldest to contact Solent and get the build teams moving. All of them. We need to monitor every channel in the fortress and we need to repair the exterior wall and we need it done an hour ago. That's in the past, Jern blinked. Just do it. The Templar closed his eyes again, and after a few seconds, winced. The eldest is yelling at me wondering what is going on, he reported. Just explain that there's too much energy in the channels and it's causing problems. What sort of problems? You want a technical explanation? Jern shook his head. I don't. After passing on that message, Tungstand met up with Cobalt and told her of the possible problem on the wall. By then, the build teams were already starting to assemble. Quickly, they crunched out a plan of attack and got everyone moving as quickly as they could, using Jern to communicate with Solent via the eldest. This was going to be a long day. Chapter 1457. Balanced on a knife. News of the damaged channels reached Solent as she settled into the command post, though she didn't expect to hear it from the eldest. How are you communicating with them? Are you really able to extend a mind bridge that far into the fortress? Ah, the eldest says, evasively. Sure, let's go with that. No, you cannot use me as a message relay. I wouldn't dream of it, Solent lied. Thanks for letting me know about the issue. I will dispatch the build teams as quickly as possible. A quick word to the messengers was enough to send several scouts running, and allowed Solent to turn her attention back to the eldest. You aren't using a mind bridge to talk to me, she said evenly. It's a new secret technique I invented. Can you explain it? It's too complicated. I could ask Brilliant to investigate. I will not. I repeat, will not. Be your relay station. My thoughts never went in such a direction, Solent continued to lie. The eldest could communicate with them without having to use a mind bridge. This was crucial information. What were the limitations? Range. Knowing the eldest, it would be absurdly powerful, more so than she expected. Just focus on the main issue, the eldest snapped. Things seem to be falling apart in there. Has anyone checked on the wall? It's happening as we speak. Gah, monsters keep coming. Try and sort things out, I'll be here on the platform if you need me. And if I need you to relay a message? Silence. Clacking her mandibles thoughtfully, Solent moved to inspect the model of the fortress hanging in the center of the command post. What had once been an expanding map of the myriad tunnels investigated by the colony had now grown to include a detailed model of the fortress itself, bisected in several places to allow access to the interior. Right now, generals were crawling over it, placing markers to indicate the sections of channel that were damaged. She'd hoped that the influx of mana from the vents would be manageable with what they'd put in place. The modeling had suggested as much, but reality often failed to live up to expectations. Victory was determined in planning and practice. This was an idiom that she lived by, and in this case, she had been no less diligent. There were backup containers, release valves, and if all else failed, they could cease taking in mana from the platforms for a period of time, though that would hurt their accumulation of energy. Calm and collected as always, she directed traffic inside the command post, issuing orders and taking in information, calculating all angles in her logistical mind. It didn't take long for the overall picture to emerge. Carvers were spread all over the fortress, inspecting the channels and looking for signs of stress, and they found them. This was always a concern. The channels were built to handle huge amounts of mana, but even the slightest flaw in their construction could lead to severe problems. It seemed that the vents were outputting far more energy, at higher levels of concentration, than they had calculated, putting immense stress on the channel networks. Flaws were being exposed at a rapid pace, and the carvers were in a race against time, trying to fix them before they overloaded and blew up in their faces. After an hour, 2 more channels had burst and additional woofer platforms had been brought online to try and deal with the excess energy. The reserve tanks were filling quickly, and Solent could feel the tension rising in the command post and amongst every ant she encountered. Projecting calm and control, she dealt with issues one at a time, making sure appropriate resources were appointed to deal with each of them, drawing on the extensive logistics network to provide what was needed in a timely manner. Then she found out about the wall. "The prisoner has escaped," reported an exhausted scout who burst into the command post. "We couldn't report since the tunnels were filled with noxious mana. Ghazi the Krath has escaped through the hole in the outer wall." Solent clacked her mandibles thoughtfully. Ghazi had escaped. This was something she hadn't anticipated. After all, what awaited him outside the fortress? A quick death, if he was lucky, or a slow, debilitating one if he was caught by his own people. It didn't make sense for Ghazi to escape. Of all the fates that awaited him, the kindest was living out the rest of his life inside his cell, and he was very, very aware of that. Something had changed, something unexpected had occurred. Solent did not like the unexpected. The world grew still around her as she pondered more deeply, trying to fit this new puzzle piece in with the rest and finding there was simply nowhere for it to go. When she imagined the campaign, it was always in this form, thousands of individual pieces, each representing an idea, an individual or collective, with their own strengths, weaknesses and unique shapes. When placed together just right, they fit harmoniously, creating spaces for other ideas to work alongside them, an expanding network of accomplishment. She had labored long and hard to create the pieces necessary to make the puzzle work, and all that she had done since was adjust the plan, making small changes here and there to keep the pieces harmoniously aligned. Now, suddenly, there was something that didn't fit. What could it be? What had changed? She honed in on the puzzle of Ghazi, a selfish, elderly Krath. Cunning and ruthless, an extreme level of self-interest, even for a Krath. What could compel him to risk his life in this way? The more she considered the problem, the more worried she became. Slight changes weren't enough to make the pieces fit. She began to imagine more and more outlandish scenarios, bending the pieces this way and that, warping them far out of shape as she considered various calamitous scenarios. The picture in her mind grew more and more disorganized, huge rents opening in what had been a harmonious whole. It grew worse, and worse until, click, Solent returned to herself and found the headquarters had grown still, all eyes on her as they waited for a response to this latest crisis. She clacked her mandibles again, a little vexed. "Get teams on the wall, we have to stop contamination at all costs. This is a priority even greater than the channels. What about the prisoner? The prisoner doesn't matter. We don't have the ability to go and get him anyway. Focus on what we can control, ignore everything we can't. Get to it, update the model, quickly," she ordered, pushed and annoyed until the rest of the ants got moving, working hard to stay on top of the unfolding catastrophe. This was a dangerous moment for the colony, more dangerous than anyone else realized. Indeed, it was possible that Solent would order a full and total retreat from the Fifth in the next few hours. Yet, she didn't think so. Solent didn't lose. She didn't care who she had to go up against, even an ancient. She refused to lose. 1458. Lock it down, Smith Ant roared, her pheromones blasting away the doubt and confusion that hung heavy in the air. Get your mandibles in there and work. If there was an invitation that no ant was likely to turn down, this was it. Rushing forward as a unit, the carvers applied themselves in the most direct and ant-like way they knew how. Mandibles to the rock, they dug and shaped, clearing space, demolishing rooms and opening a path to the outer wall. Keep pushing. The cleansed mana will protect you, so don't hesitate. Dig. Smith Ant was no formant, telling others what to do. She was a craftsant, and she put her jaws to work on the line just like the others. For the situation to be so dire that she was pulled out of the forge, she knew they didn't have time to be hesitating. This may not be the most efficient solution, but it was sure to work, and that was all she cared about. More and more ants joined in over time and they worked tirelessly, ripping away everything in their way as they opened up the damaged section of the fortress. Only when they'd isolated the problem could they hope to create a solution. As they used magic and mandibles to break down what they had already built, the scale of the issue became more and more apparent. The fortress was filled with purified mana, which kept them safe from the contamination of the fifth, yet that wasn't the only protection. The outer wall was one of the most expensive construction projects in the history of the colony, completely enchanted to repel magical energy, which prevented the mana of the fifth from even coming into contact with it. Clashes between cleansed and corrupted only took place on the platforms, which preserved an enormous quantity of cleansed energy since they didn't need it to hold back the energy over the vast majority of the wall's surface. Now, though, with a giant rent in the outer wall, the enchantments were broken and highly concentrated toxic energy was flooding into the breach, warring with the cleansed energy and burning through it at an accelerated rate. Already, Smith Ant could see sections of rock that showed the telltale signs of having been exposed to the fifth. Hints of slime, a yellow-greenish tint, strands of mucus here and there. It would be dangerous to keep going, they all knew that. Dig faster, she urged her sisters. We need stone shapers in here to peel this section back. Hurry. Soon, her mandibles began to sting, small sections sizzling and burning as malevolent mana infected them. She kept digging. At some point, core shapers appeared and threw their teams of blobby, cheerful woofers ahead of the carvers to try and cleanse any corruption, but it wasn't enough. After 2 hours, they had managed to find the source of the issue. 8 floors of the fortress had been destroyed to reveal the full extent of the hole, a gaping wound in the colony's defenses. It was enormous, dozens of meters across and twice as tall. Whatever had caused it had long ago fallen into the darkness or fizzled out, cleansed by the blue mana. Two opposing energies clashed violently at the entrance, an endless stream of native mana seeking its way inside, trying to erode the wall further while the blue rushed forward to annihilate its opposite. Mandibles burning, Smith Ant consulted with the other carvers. Are the replacement parts ready? She asked. They were delivered 10 minutes ago, came the reply. The problem is, we need to break the wall down until we find the joints, then we can replace the damage from there. How far apart are the joints? Smith Ant asked, trying to remember. She'd worked on the design for the metal struts herself, but putting together the framework had never been her area. Depends on the segment, can be as much as 100 meters. Smith Ant cleaned her antennae absent-mindedly as she eyed the wall. They could peel back the wall further, expose the joints and then start replacing the components, sealing it all up behind them, but that would be difficult work. Doing it while exposed to the outside mana would be tricky. We stay as far back as possible, she said, get the mages to dissolve the rock. I know it's hard, she said, cutting off any protest, it was designed to be resistant, I know that much. When that's done, any other smiths and specialists like me will get our mandibles in there and cut away the metal. Just make sure you have healers around. Surely, there would be a better way to do this, but the most experienced and skilled builders were busy inside the fortress dealing with the channels. She was the first to turn up, so she would get the job done. With the emergency woofers happily woofing away as close to the hole as the core shapers were willing to put them, the ant mages, specialists in construction and stone, got to work, breaking down the highly condensed stone they'd put immense amounts of effort into making. Gradually, the internal structure of the wall was revealed. Living stone, enchanted steel beams, intricate panels of arcane arrays. Once there was enough room, Smith Ant and the others rushed forward, their mandibles glowing with power as they got to work. Shaping metal was their talent, their way of life, and they had molded their evolutions and mutations to suit. Their jaws scythed through the beams as teams pulled the cut sections clear. Before her eyes, Smithant could see the edge of the wall, and several times, she drew perilously close to the enormous drop into the void beneath. She could see the clashing energies, the war of mana, that occurred right in front of her face as she cut. She could barely feel her mandibles anymore. With one section cleared, the ants rushed back to safety where healers were waiting to tend to their injuries. This is stupid. You're stupid. If it contaminates your brain, who knows what'll happen to you, the healer snapped as she brought her antennae down to Smithant's face. You want us to leave a hole in the side of the fortress? She replied. There was no answer to that question. The healers worked swiftly, but weren't halfway done when the next section was exposed. Smithant pushed herself up, ran out across the stone beams the mages had produced, and got back to cutting. Back and forth, back and forth. Her mandibles had become pitted, some parts were smoking. Without the protection of the enchantments, the beams were soaking in flecks of corrupted mana, and it was infecting the ants. It didn't matter, they had to keep going. Snap. With a final, desperate push, she sheared through the last beam, a nice clean cut, if she did say so herself. Ants holding the beam in their grip hauled it away, and now the work was done. Smithant limped back to safety. One of her eyes didn't seem to be working. Didn't matter, she could see well enough with the other. The entire segment of the wall was clear, as were the joints. Replacement parts could be slotted in, and the entire hole swiftly built over. Good. She was satisfied. Before she even made it to the healer, she collapsed. 1459. The monsters of the fifth are unique, as far as this scholar is aware, in both their unusual resilience and also their irresistible offense. Other monsters might fight with claws, or magic, or fangs, and the monsters of the fifth do this also, but they don't have to. Their very presence is a deadly weapon. Every touch has the power to kill. The mana of the fifth is an almost flawless creation, capable of consuming even other types of arcane energy, corrupting and shaping them to make more of itself. It is an infectious, unstoppable poison. Were it not for the density of energy that marks the boundaries between the strata, the entire world would have fallen prey to it by now. If indeed this energy is the creation of the ancient Theorazin, as some theorize, then I would dearly love to speak to the monster. A mastery of energy this profound, what they have made may be foul, but it is also perfect. From the writings of the unnamed heretic. I'm tired. I'm so tired. These monsters never stop. The mana never stops. The mucus never stops. Honestly, I've seen so much mucus during this wave that I'm starting to forget what the world looks like when reality doesn't have a serious cold. Starcrusher. Boom. My jaws slam shut and detonate the sphere that forms between my jaws, sending shockwaves of fire before me, burning away the slime and monsters that tried to draw near. Thanks to my new armor, I don't suffer major burns anymore, the explosion no longer searing my precious carapace. Unfortunately, my eyes are still exposed, so I'm blinded, but hey, this is still a massive improvement. Seriously, I cannot wait to evolve, just so I can reforge my eyes into an unfathomably hard substance. At the very least, I want to coat them in some clear layer that'll protect them. If I have that, then I won't have to suffer so much from my own abilities, and even the mana of the fifth won't be so intolerable since it won't have this soft and squishy point to attack. I pull back a little to let my eyes heal. Not being able to see is a bit of a pain in the neck, but it doesn't stop me from engaging with what's going on around me. My mana sense is alive and well, and I use it to sweep the tunnel ahead, along with the space to my sides, above and below. I'm on high alert after what happened before. A bomb formed of hyper-dense fifth stratum mana. That was terrifying. Caught unawares, I was barely able to stop it from destroying the entire platform, but I didn't prevent it from doing significant damage to the fortress. Whoever cast it, they're asking for a singularity right to the face. Only problem is, they displayed pretty darn high-level magic skills with that cast. I couldn't sense them forming the bomb at all, only detecting it after it was released. Without the altar, I never would have been able to summon a bomb of my own strong enough to compete in the short amount of time I had to respond. It's obviously easier to hide a bomb formed of fifth mana while out there in the fifth during a wave, but holy moly, that was a seriously dense ball of goop. Had it landed on the platform, it might have just eaten through and destroyed the entire thing, me and everyone else here along with it. With the ability to conceal spells like that, I'm unlikely to sense this individual before they decide to reveal themselves, which has me jumpy, to say the least. I've passed word to all the other platforms so they can take countermeasures, of course, but none of them have reported anything similar happening. It's a relief in a sense, but raises questions at the same time. Why only target this platform? Just because I'm here. There's no reason for the monsters of the fifth to like me, certainly, but I don't think they have a reason to be particularly angry at me either. I'm just chilling here on the platform, not hurting anyone. Well, I'm hurting thousands upon thousands of monsters, but most of them are days old at best. Gradually, my sight returns, and I push my way back to the front, taking my place in the center of the line. The wave continues to intensify, as these things do, and I'm getting worried about what it's going to look like at its peak. If the mucus flows more thickly, it might actually bridge the gap between the tunnel and the platform, flowing out onto the surface. If that happens, it's game over for us, no question. Even having to build a wall to keep it out would be a massive problem, since the wall would start to disintegrate the moment it was actually needed. Dang it, I can see more of those dang eels slithering towards us. Nasty things, their bodies are formed of, believe it or not, more eels. So if you try to cut them, they just break up, then reform, and come at you again. A few managed to get onto some of the militia, and it was not pretty. Luckily, the healers were there, but I have taken a very firm, no parasites, policy ever since. They get the Star Crusher. No exceptions. My jaws open wide, and I draw on my reserves of stamina to activate the skill. Without so many ants around, there's no way I could use it again so soon, but thankfully the will of the colony keeps me going. Again, my jaws slam shut, there is a blinding light and cacophonous explosion as the area before me is briefly transformed into a sea of flames. Mucus and eels alike are evaporated by the force of the detonation, just like my eyeballs. In that exact moment, I sense it. Not one, but two sludge bombs, from deep in the tunnel, are launched towards the platform, rising into the air as they accelerate into their arc. Ha, you thought you caught me by surprise. Waiting for me to blind myself in order to throw another sneak attack my way. You done gone lost your mind. I'm the one who's trapping you. Get a taste of this. HOOOOOOOOOOWWWWWLLLLLLLL. HOOOOOOOWWWWWLLLLLLLL. Muahahahaha. You thought throwing 2 bombs was going to be enough to catch me off guard. You thought I wouldn't exhaust myself by foolishly holding 2 bombs in readiness to throw at a moment's notice. Who's the real fool now? If I'm honest, I was hoping they'd throw 1 sludge bomb, so I could counter it with one of my own bombs, then send the other at the location they cast the spell from. Ah well, empowered by the altar, the 2 gravity bombs shoot up, sucking in air, mana, sludge and slime, everything that comes near them as they scream through the air directly towards their targets. The bombs smash into each other, sludge against gravity, and this time I'm not losing out. None of the slime is able to escape, consumed by the void that remains, rotating in place as if to declare their superiority before flickering out of existence a moment later. Hey, didn't get a drop on the fortress. You'll have to try harder, mystery spell, thing. And you better hope I don't catch a whiff of you, because if I do, not even the mana of the 5th will keep you safe from me. 1460. Moving through the dungeon during a wave wasn't something Ghazi ever expected he'd have to do again. It certainly wasn't something he'd had to do since he was a much younger slug. His first problem had been getting off the fortress at all. Being able to access the outside wasn't the same thing as being home free, oh no. The gap between the fortress wall and the rest of the 5th was substantial, much too far for a neat jump. He'd been forced to do something he really hadn't wanted to, which was climb high up the wall, then throw himself off. With enough forward momentum, he was able to reach the other side, eventually. It wasn't a journey that he liked to remember. If it weren't for the thick layer of mucus coating the wall, he never would have survived. As it was, he nearly died. Not enough to keep a good craft down. After climbing back up, he'd managed to find a likely crack in the wall and sneak away, making it deeper into the tunnels and further from the cursed ants and their delicious snacks. As much as he would like to credit his incredible wiles and experience, Ghazi was just lucky. Incredibly lucky. After the 3rd time a monster had simply stepped over him, not bothering to lean down and inspect his compressed and camouflaged form, he was beginning to think something strange was going on. After all, what were the odds that he'd been able to escape from the ants at all? Not good. Not good in the slightest. It felt as though someone or something was tipping the scales in Ghazi's favor, and he had some suspicions as to who. Was Therazin really able to influence events on the 5th stratum from all the way down, wherever it was that ancients lived? If someone had asked him a few days ago, the old Krath would have said of course not. Now, He wasn't so sure. Regardless, he was no longer quite so shocked when he managed to find the Krath outpost without being eaten a dozen times over. And, of course, Chost was extremely pleased to see him. After being thrown down to the floor, much as he'd expected, it took a few moments to realize that the powerful Krathlath, sliding towards him, mouth open and flesh sizzling, intended to eat him without a word being exchanged. If he was going to live, he was going to have to speak up for himself. The singing, he burbled, face still pressed into the ground. I found the singing. For a terrifying second, he thought that Chost wasn't going to stop. The red rage in her eyes was all-consuming, and he could feel the acrid sting of her breath on his skin before she finally paused. "The what?" she rasped, still too consumed by anger and hatred to process his words properly. The ancient commanded and Ghazi has listened. I found the singing. Her arms lashed out, painfully squishing him down to the rocky floor of the chamber as her loyal followers watched on. "And you're a loyal servant of the ancient, are you, Ghazi? You're barely a Krath. I am as I was born," he forced out. "No," she hissed, "you're not. You weren't born a traitor." The acid in her burned so fiercely that her saliva, dripping down onto his skin, ate into him. To be a traitor amongst the Krath, who didn't have much of a sense of loyalty, was almost an accomplishment in Ghazi's eyes. He'd betrayed the tribe of his birth, his siblings, betrayed many of his fellow Krath, time and time again, cheated, lied, stole and schemed to keep himself alive, as all of them did. He was unique in one regard only: he had betrayed the Krath as a whole. Betrayed what it meant to be Krath. There was only one thing the Krath hated more than each other: everything else. The old slug was starting to believe even the benediction of the ancient may not be enough to save him anymore. Well, he'd lived a long life for a slug of the tribes. At least if he saw Thirazan in the decaying world, he would be able to say he did as he was asked. "The singing is coming from somewhere inside the fortress of the invaders," he said. "I was locked in a cell and I could hear it day and night. Maddening, haunting, enraging. I would have done anything to get away from it. Inside the fortress. Inside the fortress. You're sure? Would an old slug like me have been able to make it back here if there wasn't something important for me to say? I saw a vision of Thirazan, of the Maker, and I knew the second I heard that song that it was wrong. Who or what is doing the singing, traitor?" Chost burbled so deep in her throat it sounded as if she were speaking from her stomach. "I don't know," he replied, then allowed himself to go limp on the stone floor. Immediately he was squashed down painfully flat. After a few moments, Chost relented, withdrawing her limbs. "Go ahead then," Ghazi muttered. "Eat me and be done with it. I did what I set out to do. Sell us out to the enemy. Give away the secrets of the Krath to invaders. Was that what you set out to do?" She spat on him. "You will be consumed, Ghazi, but not by me. Your flesh and your acid belong to your tribe. When your Krathlath returns, he will administer your final fate. Until then, we will throw you in a hole." Ghazi was roughly seized on both sides by large, overbearing slugs. "What time will you be serving tea?" He grinned.